The argument that I made earlier with Xbox, that I was talking about with him in terms of God having the maximal states of the properties that we have, like intelligence or knowledge or love or all these attributes that we dump on, including the personhood, everything that's foundational to his personhood. I understand why we have personhood or why we have the attributes we have, and I don't see an account for God having them, or that one that lines up with it would. I can't see a case where God happens to have them and we went through a process and ended up with them, unless that process was directed towards him having it. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, that's, I guess you would have to go into that more, because really what you're saying is I can't see how it makes any sense, therefore, that's not an argument.
Well,
but I mean,
like
I see where there's some potential. I see where there's some potential there to have a good conversation where it could apply, depending on the the qualities being given to the god or being claimed that this god has, where that could.
Well, for instance, God, any notion of God is a creature that, or a being that wills, that has a will, or that has thoughts, or acts, right? And I have an account for why I act and why I will and why I have the properties that I have. But this maximal being, there's no reason that a being would be that way. There's no account for its properties. It just is, right? Like that's what ends up being the argument, is that God is that way. He just happens to be that way.
I think that really depends on the kind of God that's being posited. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions being made there, right?
Well, I'm assuming any God would be a God who acts, who has a will, that wills actions.
I mean, there's also concepts of God where it has no choice but to create. It's just a creative force, and that's all it can do. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's my particular view, but I'm just, if you're looking for an argument for atheism itself, so it kind of, in one argument, you get to address all concepts of God. There are concepts of God where, the Creator has no choice but to create.
Yeah, but those conceptions of God, I think, they reduce God to nothing more than he's just a kind of natural force.
Right, that's true. I agree with that, but still, the question is, was the universe, or was it created or not? That's the question we're trying to answer, and somebody puts forth some kind of argument or has, whatever, about just a creative force. The universe is, in fact, still created, and that's
it's not created. No, it's not created in that case. It's not created by an intelligence. I
didn't say created by intelligence. I said created.
Right, but then it's just an effect. It's
meaningless to call that a god, though. At that point,
it's meaningless to call that a creation.
That's a semantical thing that you guys can do later, but it's still created.
Well, no. It's come into existence. We distinguish between things that come into existence and things that are created. When we reserve the word creator for artifacts, things that are brought into existence by some kind of intelligence, either for some kind of purpose. It can be just recreational, or it could be something more pragmatic and functional. But the word, when we talk about a creator, we're talking invariably about positing a being with a mind that intended to create what it created, whatever purposes it might have had. Okay. Right. But the conception of God that you were just talking about, where God is just a kind of a force that doesn't have a mind or purposes, that's not a creator in the sense that we mean, that we're concerned with. That is just some kind of metaphysical cause, right? It can be completely mindless. Well, yes, presumably, if you're a naturalist, you would say that, yeah, the universe, if it came into existence because of some kind of cause, a metaphysical one perhaps, and okay, then the universe is an effect. But that's to say that the universe is an effect, not a creation. But when we talk about the word creation, that's a word that connotes being an artifact.
Hang on, because what I said is that there's a concept of a creator where it is a being, but it has no choice but to create. Right, so it's not just a force. You said that that's essentially just reducing it to a force, which could be the case, and I think that could be argued. But that's not what I said.
Oh, so you're positing that this is a being with a mind?
I'm not positing, no.
No. I'm not saying you're endorsing, but you're positing. You're putting on the table this conception of a God that has a mind and is deliberately creating something, but couldn't do otherwise.
Right. That's all it can do.
Okay. Yes, that would qualify. That would qualify.
Yeah. Thank you. That's kind of what I said 3 minutes ago.
Although I think I think if you were to analyze that conception, I think that what you would be positing there is a robot.
Right. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, what would the attribution of a mind, like Helena asked a similar question in terms of, when we think of a mind, we think of something that functions towards a certain has certain processes that lead it to a certain thing. If it's something that can't help but control or help but create, what is a mind to that thing? What is the property of a mind? What is it doing? It seemed to me that it would be no different than Alan Guth talks about the free lunch universe, that universes are likely to will inevitably happen, and in that case you just have this, you have the multiverse essentially just spawning off universes with no purposive actor behind them. That would seem to be no different than a god who has a mind but has no other property other than that it creates beyond its control. The mind isn't functional in that sense. It's just baggage.
Well, I mean, that could be the case. But I mean, you could always have the mind of this being that does other things. That minds don't. But then you run into the problem of how can you even identify it as a mind if it's so, dissimilar from ours and blah blah blah. But my main point is that if it's going to be an argument for atheism, not just against a particular god, then it's going to have to encompass a lot.
I think it's identifying what properties a god, anything that we're going to call a god, would necessarily have. If it's the creative property, and it's not purposive, then there are lots of creative properties that are non-purposive that go on all the time, right? Or creative forces.
But it seems kind of counterintuitive to come up with properties for something that you're going to be eventually arguing against. I more liked your idea of it being a placeholder, kind of in the same sense that the singularity or the Big Bang is a placeholder for, it's just where things break down, and it's the big question mark. And like Ozzy was saying earlier, it's just like you just reserve judgment on it. Just because you don't have any good reason to believe in it doesn't mean you don't believe in it. You're leaving it open. It's a placeholder. So I don't, and I also think the proposition of arguing for atheism is just, I can't see how that would work, and I don't see the value in it, to be honest.
Wouldn't you have reasons? I mean, beyond the less rarefied or the more rarefied gods of, like the Abrahamic God and the other gods who have particular things that they interacted with in this earth that we can evaluate and decide whether it's the case or not. For the gods who are more more rarefied, who have less about them that we can evaluate, you would need those types of arguments, right? You would need to say, if you weren't going to believe them, you would say why your reasons are for not believing that it's the case.
But that's not an argument for atheism. That's an argument against those gods, and an argument against something isn't an argument for your position.
Yeah, an atheistic argument would have to go to show why it's not possible for a god to exist.
No, it doesn't have to show not possible. You don't have to demonstrate the absolute impossibility.
It's more likely to be the case.
It just has to be more plausible. More plausible to be true. I mean, it's no more necessary to prove that a god can't exist to be an atheist than one has to prove conclusively that God exists to be a theist. We don't go saying, oh, you're only a theist if you can absolutely conclusively rule out the non-existence of a god and the absolute positive existence of your god. That's setting the bar too high, and so atheists don't have to do that any more than theists have to do that.
Yeah, it would be on the probability. That's the route William Lane Craig takes with that. It's more reasonable to believe.
Right. Yeah.
That's a better way of framing it, right? We're not arguing absolutely that a God does or doesn't exist, and for the non-existence of God or for the existence of God. We're pretty much, putting on the table what accounts for our position being reasonable and why we choose it as being more reasonable than other positions.
Right.
But I could argue if we're going to say gods have minds and that have thoughts, which I tend to attribute with gods, that gods have a mental component with thoughts about them, then I can make an argument for why I think it's unlikely the case that a being would happen to have thoughts without an account for how it came to have thoughts, right?
Right, that's what you were arguing earlier, is that for us to get knowledge, we go through a process to gain knowledge. When you apply that to the God, there's no process there, but has knowledge.
Even it's a little bit what Ozzy was saying earlier about trees, right? That trees don't have the features they don't have because they don't use them, right? We have uses for the features we have, and that's how those features came about.
Right.
Right. In the case of God, what is the use of knowledge and how, or intellect, and how did a God come across that? Now that's probably one of the few arguments that I could raise that's just about the generic God without any other claims. I don't have any in terms of creation or other aspects of it, but in terms of a mind, it seems to me like I do have at least an argument that is that's persuasive to me, and that actually is an argument against a God that would have a mind.
So would that be the argument? Why does God have a mind?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but is that one question of it?
Sorry, Xbox.
No, please go.
So I don't see how that is an argument so much as it's an objection.
Well, it's that I'm being given something with a certain. It would be if somebody was articulating something that I didn't have any exposure to, and they're telling me that it has a given property, but I know that property, I could drop a really dumb analogy, but it would be an analogy that it would have been a property that I would have come to know that comes to be the case through some process, but they're positing it for something that doesn't have any relation to that at all, right? So let's say. I don't want to come up with a bad analogy.
I'll come up with a bad one if I can. Is like a car, for me to know what a car was. Say I've never seen a car before, and I have to go through a process of seeing a car, seeing that to know what a car is now.
It might be.
God doesn't go through this process, but knows what the car is.
A car that grows long fur. Let's say that it was a car that grew its hair long. Well.
Sure.
I can conceive of such a thing, but I have a reason why I think that there aren't cars that grow their hair long, right? And so I don't think that such a thing exists. Such a thing could exist, but I don't associate those properties because I know what it is to have a hair that you grow long, and I know how that comes to be the case. And so I might find it highly unlikely that a car would grow its hair long.
Okay, so something I want to say So the question is, was the universe created or not, right? So one of the ways that you can go about it is you can run arguments from analogy, or you can look for things that are similar. Like I know how, I see this going on in the universe, and I also know that humans do this, that humans do something similar to this. Okay, so we have some kind of this is very weak and loose right now, but you'll understand that we can run an analogy between we see. Entity A doing this, and then we see the same thing that entity A just did, or something very similar going on out in the universe. So we can start to infer, okay, maybe there was a mind responsible, because I know that this kind of thing only comes from a mind. So we go kind of backwards to answer that one question. What you're asking is almost a separate question. It would be like once we got to this point, like, okay, look, I see all of these analogies I can run, all of these evidences out in the universe that suggest a mind is involved, and you're going, okay, but how did it get a mind? Well, I don't know. I was answering this question. That's something you can evaluate, but I mean, not knowing the answer to that doesn't in any way negate all of these other arguments from analogy or whatever kind of arguments come up.
Right. There would be other arguments related to how I thought those processes came about. I would evaluate them, and if I didn't come, it might be the case that if I was persuaded in all those cases that necessitated a mind at the start, then I might agree with you. But I haven't been persuaded of those, and so then
That's fine. That's fine, but I mean, your persuasion level has nothing to do with what's true, right? So it's... Well, I think it's a good question and a good point. I don't think that it negates the arguments for the existence of a mind.
But I don't have to, again, I don't have to negate it. I just have to think it's more reasonable to think it doesn't have one, right?
Right, to hold your position, right, of course.
Right.